All right, welcome to the August 14th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. I'm just going to do a quick test to make sure that we have some audio going. Bear with me. Okay, so it seems like we have our audio. So my name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host of today's Hangout. I'm broadcasting from the United States in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. area. If you haven't been on a Hangout before, how it kind of works is you can ask questions in the live chat field, we'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for. We'll try to go for about 4 hours today. So if you are watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and feel free to ask questions. Questions can also be submitted in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de, and if you include your email address, I could do kind of a direct response. We'll try to get through all the questions. We'll probably do it chronologically as people ask questions. So if you ask the same question repeatedly over and over again, it won't increase your chance of getting your question answered. So the questions, the chat field will be in probably just a little bit well ahead of my actual ability to answer questions. So if you could just be patient, we'll try to go through that. At some point, my chat field will kind of reset itself. So I may lose some questions in the middle. I'll let you know. So, but we'll try to get through as many as possible. And we'll get started here. If you're watching this afterwards, you may want to skip ahead till about 10 minutes as people are logged in and have done introductions. And like many of you during the pandemic, I have my family here. So you may hear my son. We have my mother-in-law and sister-in-law are here for my mother-in-law's birthday. So we're going to celebrate that after the hangout. So you may hear some noise, or there may be an interruption where I may have to get a TV show on for my son, and my wife is working directly above me. So you may hear her walking, and she's probably going to be on a conference call. So I apologize for any breaks that we'll have. We'll try to keep them as small as possible. So we'll go ahead and see who's getting logged in. We're letting people get logged in. And then we could go ahead and get started in just a few minutes. All right, so we have a number of questions. And when asking a question, sometimes it could be, sometimes be helpful if you indicate which version of Cubase that you're running, if it's, Cubase Elements versus Cubase Artist or Cubase Pro. So let's see who's on the Hangout today. So we have Ace. All right. So we have people. Sabankar from India. I probably totally mispronounced your name. I apologize. All right. So we have Ted Springman from Sherman Oaks. Okay, so we have a question on chord pads. Okay, so we have London. All right, so John from Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have Pablo from Spain. Taylor from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. Okay, some more questions on chord tracks. Okay, so we have Montreal. right, so Slovenia, Bavaria, sorry. Okay, so we have Liverpool. Always wanted to go. Maybe one day we could travel more. Okay, so we have UK, Sweden. Okay, so let's see who else is on. So we have Stockholm, Cambridgeshire. All right, Jazz Dude's on a hangout. We missed you on the last hangout, Jazz Dude. I'm not sure if you were on the last live one. So I see a question from Nitty Gritty asking if it's possible to set up a multi-thread. So if you could maybe indicate if that's a multi-thread for CPU usage or not. So I saw Robbie from Dallas as well. Robbie Bowling, good to see you on a hangout. Charlotte. Agent K is on a hangout. He does a great job of moderating for us. All right, so we have Ghana, Africa. All right, so we have Matt from Fort Wayne. Okay, we're just waiting for some more people to get logged in, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, glad to see that Jazz Dude is hopefully feeling better. Too much heat in Heidelberg, I guess. Okay, so we'll get started in just a couple minutes, then some more people get logged in. Okay, some more people getting logged in. Okay, so we have sub 403. All right, so we have Jason from South Shields, England. So once again, for nitty gritty, if it's is it a multi? I saw your clarifications and that indicates actually a multi-thread into bass that would match a multi-thread, or is it automatic and depend on 64-bit? So is when you say into bass, is it multi-threaded for processing? for like CP, do you want to know if a plugin could be run across multiple processors? So maybe if you clarify that, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. Hi, Greg. I hope you and your family are doing well. We are. Thanks for asking. What was the Steinberg download link to convert old Cubase 5 2003 songs and projects into Cubase 10.5? Thanks. So previous to when SX was released, there was two different file formats that could be used for Cubase. There was a .all, a song file, and an arrangement file, a .arr. And those were still imported until Cubase 4. So you would to import a Cubase VST 5, and this is before, not to be confused with Cubase 5. So which came out maybe 2005-ish. So you would just need to download a Cubase SX3 or Cubase SL3, open up the .all or .arr files, and be able to save them as a .cpr file. So you just need to, it's not necessarily a download link, but you could just download your SX3 or SL3, or I think they called it SE3 at the time. So at that point, you could just simply download that version and save it. And your Cubase, 5, 7, 9, 10.5, any subsequent version, the license will still open up Cubase SX3. So just download Cubase SX3 and you should be all set. Question. Hi, Greg. I am from India. Would you please help figure out how I can select high-cut filters on all channels in the mixer? I want to select all with a command or so. So probably the easiest way to do this, let's say I think I have a number of audio tracks here. If you wanted to select, I'll go into kind of the full screen mixer. And let's say I will just have like an EQ. Let's say if I enable quick link, at this point, if you wanted to do, just to make sure I have the right one. And so if you want to do a high cut filter, all you'd have to do is to just simply select one here. And once all these are selected in quick link, which you could also enable by holding down Alt and Shift, you could just come here. And if you wanted to just, be able to just do like a high cut filter, you could do that. So, and now they're all going to function independently. But if I just take off my quick link, so now I could make adjustments just on this particular EQ without that being affected. So if whatever you want to do, I'll just undo a couple of these. So you can select all of your channels in the mixer. It's not necessarily command, but if you wanted to select all these, hold down Alt and Shift or Option Shift, and while you're here, you could just adjust and that will automatically apply to all of your different tracks. So if you wanted to solo, if you wanted to, mute all those selected tracks, that way those commands can be just linked together. So I would try just using quick link, and I think that will help you with that. From Scambot Terminator. Hello, Greg, everyone. Question. I had converted a MIDI part to audio so as to do a reverse part on it, but I also need to stretch the part out a bit longer and I'm stuck. Please help, Greg. Thank you. So one easy way of doing time stretching on a particular file, if we want to look at it here, is there's different object selection modes. So if I have a drum loop here, let's go ahead and just listen to this. Our typical mode and usually default mode will allow us to just Move are different start or end points here, but there's also alternate modes. And one of the alternate modes is called sizing applies time stretch. And at this point, if you needed to stretch out a sample longer, you could just grab the right bottom edge and just drag it out, and it's just going to time compress that file. So that's all you have to do is say, I want it to fit into that amount of space, and then your audio will automatically stretch accordingly to what you have set up. So another question. Also, is there a way to record multiple channels at once? I had set up several instances of Omnisphere that layer over each other perfectly when played with monitor, but have to record separately. So, if you want to just record, let's say, multiple instrument tracks, you could select these and just place Cubase into record. So as you're kind of going along here, I could just draw in, let's say I'm just playing in some random MIDI stuff. It's not being routed anywhere. So I've just now recorded, I placed all 3 tracks. So if this is going to instance 1 of Omnisphere, instance 2, instance 3, just place them all into record and just record simultaneously. And that way, as you're recording, you could just see the MIDI data just kind of appear directly in as I just kind of play. And so that's how you could record for multiple tracks simultaneously going out to multiple instances. You could also take these tracks, so if you wanted to, you could right-click and move the selected tracks to new folder, and then you could just record enable directly from the folder if you wanted to as well. Okay. Hi, Greg. This is from Ted Springman. Hi, Greg from Sherman Oaks. Do you have any words of encouragement for my friend Pat from Pennsylvania, who is a recovering Pro Tools user in search of a new DAW? I think Cubase, represents multiple, handles more workflows better than any other program. And I think, one of the things that I've always appreciated about Cubase is that it allows you to work how you want to without necessarily predisposing a set workflow that's very rigid. So if you're coming from a program that kind of, where a lot of projects end up sounding similar because of the design of the workflow of the program, you're able to do, really customize Cubase and work with it how you want to. And so whether you're doing, hip hop or EDM tracks, or you're a film composer, or you're doing rock bands, a number of those things can work. Those can all work really well in Cubase, and you can customize it and, have Cubase work for you instead of you working to try to get the DAW to realize your creativity. Okay, so a question. Hope that was helpful, Ted. Hi, Greg. Question. When I create chord symbols from a MIDI event, it doesn't capture all of the voicings. Example, an A minor chord, if I use A1, E2, A2, AC, or A2, C3, E3, I'm trying to drag them to the chord pad to play. So let's go ahead and I'll just go ahead and enter in some of those. So yeah, I think what you'll find is that the chord pad is going to play the chord, and then you could define kind of the voicings for it. So if we come here, let's see if I could recreate the chord you spelled out. I'll just make this larger so my Mr. Magoo vision will be okay. Okay, so let's say it's going to be A1, E2, all right, then A2, all right, C3 and E3. Okay, so now if we want to drag this, I'll just make sure that this is A1. All right. E2, A2, C3, E3. Okay. Oh. So if you want this, you know, you could all right, so I'll switch it over to the chord pads. All right, I'll move my tablet here real quick. So I'll just try to play it in. All right, let's just all right, so A, E. All right, let me just okay, so let me see if I can just get this going. So let's see if I could take this part and maybe just have it create the chord. So I'll just say, let's create the chord symbols. Okay, I'll drag this down. So it looks like if you, I'm not sure if you've gone through the different voicings for the chords, but you know, you could kind of go through here, but it may not show the exact voicings of your chords, but you know, try to make sure that you've, let's see if we do that. So, you know, it may not do the, let's see if we, I'm not sure if you've gone through every one of these voicings. So it looks like the voicings aren't the exact chord voicings they have, but you could get pretty close if you wanted to trigger that. But I could do some more research on that if you want to email me at clubcubase at steinberg.de. Okay, hi, I have a Keytar Roland AX Edge and I want to connect MIDI to Cubase via Bluetooth. How is it possible? Cubase will see anything that is incoming MIDI data. So if the computer is seeing it as a MIDI controller, Cubase, at the operating system level, Cubase will see that to accept incoming MIDI data. So if you go to your studio setup, you could actually check to make sure that we have we will go here to like the MIDI port setup, and you should see it listed here. If it's not listed here, Cubase is drawing from the computer's operating system. For this, that means that the Bluetooth connection is not established at the operating system level, but there's nothing specific you have to do for Cubase to have the Bluetooth connectivity. It's going to be commuting either with, Mac OS or Windows 10 to have that driver recognized. So if you see it in the MIDI port setup, at that point, that means that the computer operating system is seeing it, and it could be that maybe there's a switch that allows it to transmit via USB 5-pin DIN or Bluetooth. So at that point, you can make sure that switch, or it could be hardware or software, make sure that switch is in the right mode. And then if it's communicating with the computer at the operating system level, at that point Cubase will see it. So nothing really special that you have to do to make the Keytar work. All right. Hi, Greg. Greetings from London. To everyone, can you please go through the setting up of a keyboard MIDI channel in order to record a 60s synth sound, but assuming there's no audio connected? So if you have, just a keyboard, like a synthesizer workstation, let's say, like a DX7 or an M1, something along those lines, all you need to do is to add a MIDI track. So when we have a MIDI track, and we're going to have a MIDI interface. So if it's a 60 synth, if it is a 60 synth, that's going to predate. So let's say so when we have our MIDI channel here, we could see our 16 MIDI channels that could be selected here. And we could tell what MIDI port that we're going to have that keyboard set to. So once you have the correct port, and you can say, my MIDX8 port 3 is going out to my DX7, port 4 is going out to my Kurzweil, and port 5 is going out to my JV1080. At that point, we could direct the port here and the MIDI channel where that sound is loaded. Now, one of the things that a lot of people working kind of integrating hardware instruments into like a VST world is that if you don't have you would probably need to have a mixer for those interfaces, or a way to hear those interfaces, those external keyboard sources. So in my studio, I have like two Mackie LM3204s, because that gives me 64 channels and 10 rack spaces of inputs. So you would need to hear, if you don't have an audio interface, you would need to have some way to hear the sound, because the MIDI doesn't capture the sound. It just captures that these notes were pressed down for this long, and it's going to generate, this will send out the MIDI data from the correct MIDI channel and the correct MIDI port. And at that point, it sends it out to the device, and that device is going to be generating the tone, and that's why they're often called tone generators. And then to hear that, you need to have headphones to hear it, or route it into a mixer with other devices. So there's nothing really super special, but instead of using an instrument track, you want to have a MIDI track. So instrument tracks only can be sent to virtual instruments, whereas MIDI tracks can go out to the real tactile world. If you have an audio interface with available inputs, you could, I know this is kind of outside of the question, but you could go to your studio, go to your audio connections under your studio menu, and you could connect it to an external instrument, and that way you could route the audio outs of that instrument and define it here. So hopefully that makes sense. But and if the instrument doesn't have MIDI, then you're going to have to record it as audio, the performance. Okay, so we see also what is, and this is getting back to the chord track, what is the benefit of using the show scale feature? It seems to be useful, but I think I'm missing something. So a lot of times when we have a show scale feature, and this is dealing with the chord track. So if I'm here, I will activate the show scale, and we could have different scale options, and we could choose to not have these locked. So what the show scale often allows us to do is we could set a particular key and scale. So I'll say I want this to be an A minor. So at this point I will just say, okay, we want to do, let's say, an A melodic minor. You know, we could do this, or you could set up your different scales just like so. So let's say, you know, I want this to be an A, you know, so let's just say harmonic minor. So at this point, we could look at this and say, okay, when we go into editing of MIDI parts or doing like Vari audio, we could colorize based upon the chord track and a scale. So we could have these notes that are green, they're within the scale. If I move this note to, and it turns to the color, to this color, kind of an aqua color, I'm the world's worst person for naming colors. That means it's within the scale. Green is within a chord. And if I move it to a red pitch, like we did here, that indicates that it's out of key. So it's falling out of the scale. So those are a couple of the reasons why you may want to use the scale function, so that you could recognize as you're doing editing that this could be a note that's out of key, this note is in key, this note is within the chord, just by looking at it visually here by color. Question: how do I uninstall third-party plugins that I no longer use? It could, you know, on Windows, there's generally, most plugins would have an uninstall function that have been installed. Sometimes you may just drop a DLL file into a plugins folder. So if you have plugins that have been just dropped in, you could remove it from whatever VST plugin folder that you have placed it into, and Cubase won't open that up. Some programs may install libraries or audio samples, and generally if they're doing that, they would have an install program, and generally, and I think Taylor, you're on Windows if I'm not mistaken, you could just simply run, you know, go into your Windows control panel and choose to remove programs. On a Mac, there's generally not a typical uninstaller, so you may just have to drag the file, you may have to just drag the plugin to the trash can. Sometimes there's other files and preferences that could still be left behind, but on Windows you could just do the add remove programs. If it came with content, or if it's just a DLL file that was installed, you could just manually remove it. Okay, question from Taylor. When I record, the meter on the track I'm recording on is unaffected by the fader volume until the recording is finished. Is there a preference to make the meter respond while in record mode? So you probably need to adjust maybe the meter position. So if you look at your particular mix console here, if you right click in the meter area, go down and you'll see global meter settings. And here you see a meter position. So you may want to see like input meters when you're recording, but when mixing, you may want to switch it to post fader or post panner. So I think if you switch it to the input meter, that you should be, that will show you what the meter is of the signal coming in. If you have post panner, if you've adjusted the pan settings on a particular track, you could just see, you may see this meter be more geared, like the right channel in a stereo track be louder than the left channel. With the post fader meter position, that would show you, as you adjust the volume here, you would see the volume change of the track going out to the master stereo bus. At that point, we could see what the metering is that's being passed on. So a lot of people use input meter for tracking and then switch to post fader or post panner for mixing. So I would try switching your meter position. Okay, question. When tempo detect only detects up to a point and stops or breaks up, how do I fix the issue? So if you have a file that you've done tempo detection on, and the tempo detections, you may not work for every single piece. It does a pretty phenomenal job of doing, a tempo detection. So, but let's say if I just wanted to do a tempo detection on that file, we'll come here. And when the tempo detection is done, if you find that it's like you had more data and like something the algorithm didn't catch, it places you into, by default, the time warp tool. So, when we see this, like the top timeline change to this brown, this indicates that we're in time warp. And what we could do is once you're in time warp, you could move the measures to fit like very specific points rhythmically. And as you do this, it will automatically do a tempo calculation from there. So what I would do if you have a file that's not doing tempo correction is, come over here. And sometimes if you just do one or two more spots using the time warp functionality, and again, this is moving the measure. So sometimes it's helpful to have the event like, right up underneath, and you move the measure to fit the actual event, either in MIDI or in, so if this is, different measure, you could just come right over here and adjust the position. So you see that as we do this, if I adjust, that is automatically kind of doing an analysis and reapplying the tempo detections subsequently after that particular point for you. Okay. Let's go on. Okay, question. Simplest way to pitch an audio track, sharp or flat in fine degrees? So we could do this directly from the info line. So let's say if I want to select an event. Sorry, just restart here quickly. I may have to restart my computer. I'll just know in a second here. I'll see. All right, if everyone could just hang on, I'm going to reboot my computer. And so just kind of hang on for like 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll be right back. Let me go ahead and just get everything. I'm just going to reboot quickly. So just bear with me just for a minute. All right, so I think I'm back. I'm just going to check my audio connections here quickly. And let me just monitor, make sure. All right, so just going to check, just to make sure it's still going on. And we'll see if it's, I just don't want to go on without audio going forward. Okay, so I think we're okay. So let's go ahead and move on. So we asked a question about simplest way to pitch up an audio track, sharp or flat in fine degrees. So I will take just, let's say, all you have to do is select the file, and then you will see a transpose function here. So if I just play this particular audio file and we'll loop it, I could transpose by semitones, but I could also choose fine tune. And as we do fine tune, this is synths. So if we do like 100 cents, that'd be your semitone. So all you have to do is from the info line, you'll see transpose, and just to the right of that, you have fine tune. So select the event, and then you could just do fine tuning just like so. Okay. So I see wish for a happy birthday to my brother-in-law. It's actually my mother-in-law's birthday, but thank you for the sentiment. I'll pass it along to her. Okay, so a question, create harmonies in Cubase Pro 10.5. My artist and I have different views, letting Cubase create. Disadvantages, is it common to use a DAW to create harmonies, or does the artist want to sing them? You could do either. A lot of DAWs don't have the ability to actually have harmonies generated. So it's kind of, I think it's a fairly unique thing. And if they do, a lot of times the harmonies they generate don't work musically based upon a chord. So if you haven't seen this function before, just open up a quick project so we could show it. So I'm going to, like here I have a piano part, and if I want to look at it in like my score editor, I could double click here, and we can see our piano part in the score editor. So I'm going to just select all of the notes in the score editor, just a Control or Command A. And I will go to the project menu to chord track, and I'll just say create chord symbols. At this point, I usually leave the top two checked, and this now has automatically created a chord track based on what we've done here based on the piano. So as we play, now if I wanted to see these in the actual piano score, we could go to scores, to advanced layout, and say show chord track. And now the chord track will just be laid out directly. So if we come here, I'll double click and we'll go to, let's say, our very audio editor. And just like we showed a bit before with the, earlier when they asked about, why having the scale function. So at this point, we're going to just colorize and choose the color scheme based on chord track. So we could listen to this. So as soon as I do that, I'm going to, just with my range selection tool, I'm going to select where she's saying, tell me why. I'll just turn my snap off quickly. So I'll say, let's just grab this, and I will go to my audio menu. And now that we've defined what the chords are, like a C9 chord going to a G, we could click on Generate Harmony Voices. And as we want to listen to it now, let's say I'll choose to bring these down in volume a bit, make them a little more contextual. So now the questions are, you kind of getting to the point of, is this right? What's the advantage? What's the disadvantage? There's no real disadvantage. Sonically, you may come up with better sounding, more traditional stuff if the singer sang it. A lot of times what I use this for is to actually, come up with different harmony ideas. Because I find a lot of singers sometimes don't practice harmonies. And they could be very nervous going into the studio. So if all of a sudden you're just like, oh, it'd be so cool in this line if you just put a harmony in, and they're like, oh, I never practiced that, and they're already nervous to start off with. If it's that kind of scenario, sometimes, having Cubase generate the harmonies works really well. And sometimes, you may generate the harmonies and say, just sing this part. So you may just come over here and say, I don't want to hear, I want you to sing a harmony that is just, sing this part here. So, okay, now sing another harmony that's just like this. Oh, sorry. Say, okay, now I want the soprano harmony voice. So, you could definitely take the, computer generated harmonies and blend them with a real singer and get like really interesting results. But there's a lot of times when maybe the singer's left, or you recorded them over VST Connect and they're not able to, physically be there. That's when, doing the automatic generated harmonies is really useful. So, if you have a singer that could just nail every harmony, great, I would do that, but when that situation doesn't happen, which could be a lot of times, I would use the computer generated ones. Okay. All right, so just going back to so just kind of a further comment about our keytar, a Roland AX Edge. I want to connect to Cubase by Bluetooth, and then some more information with this. It's a CC command or a MIDI command to select next up or next down channel from an Alesis Vortex Wireless. Thank you. So if you wanted to, do channel up, channel down, that may not be as applicable in Cubase, because when you have a MIDI track here, the channel and port will be determined by what is set here in Cubase and not what's on. So you could be inputting channel 2, but as long as MIDI is coming in, if you have this set to all MIDI inputs, then we will see, that incoming MIDI data just recorded and captured, and it's not necessarily channelized if you have the channel set there. So give that a shot and let us know if I'm misunderstanding. Okay. Okay, so I know there's some more information later with this, but the question was from Nitty Gritty. Is it possible to set up multi-thread for your VST plugins in Cubase Pro 10.5? So if this is dealing with processors, like, being able to split a plugin across multiple processors, generally, as you run a plugin, it's gonna, like, the plugins generally run on one processor. So if you have like a really heavy duty reverb plugin, that could be taking up one processor and not utilizing other processors. A lot of times if you have a big VST instrument, and when we look at the VST instrument and you have multiple voices in the instrument, like this one, this is utilizing one processor for this instrument. So, if you are wanting to optimize for multi-core performances, at that point you would, if you had a really slower computer, you may get better results having different instances of Halion Sonic SE, each with one of the sounds as opposed to stacking multiple sounds. But I think we have some more information later with this question, and we'll see if that makes sense, and we'll move on. Okay, question, Win 10, 10.5 Pro, is there a way to select multiple filter selections at the same time in MediaBay? Control selection works on one at a time, but if you want to select 10 at a time. So let's take a look. So let's say if we want to do different filter conditions, so let's say if I just so it looks like you could do kind of one at a time. So I think what the question is wanting to do is to select multiple filter conditions from the same row. So saying I wanted to select keyboard all the way through piano. So I think you may just have to do that. Let me just see if there's a way to maybe drag conditions. So I think it's going to be one condition at a time that you could add. And holding down Control or Command, you could select multiple conditions. So, I don't know of a way to do that just off the top of my head. I'm not sure. Like a lot of times when you're in MediaBay, you may not look for an organ and a piano and a strings and a synth lead and a synth pad sound. So I haven't had the chance to, to really go through, I personally haven't had a scenario to select multiple ones, but I think you'd have to do them individually. All right, so question, can Hallian use higher velocity values to start a sample further in so that it bypasses the slow attack, for example, of a violin, where typically the bow takes a moment to get up to speed? I think it could be definitely kind of programmed to do that. Let's see if we can we'll see if we could do this quickly without going down a rabbit hole. And a lot of times you may just kind of start your samples accordingly. So let's say if I'll just drag in a vocal file here, and let's see if we go into the editing. I haven't done this, but I'm sure that you could probably do it. But you could definitely set up like multiple layers as well. So let's say if I'm here, we'll just choose our start range. So now if I and probably in here you could, set different playback conditions. And even if you go into so I'm sure that you could get it to set up like that. And I think a lot of libraries may kind of do stuff like that. I could take a look at it a little more detail. I don't want to spend like 20 minutes while you watch my brain work slowly and probably badly. So let's go ahead and we'll move on. Okay, so question, can you run a Connect Pro from the start first timer for this? Thanks. Okay, so, a lot of times when you're just starting out like a VST Connect, the easiest way to do it is to you could go to like a VST Connect SE and create a VST Connect SE. This will allow you to see your computer setup here. This will add a track called Performer Record, and this works in conjunction with the control room. So it's going to add kind of a control room element here. So let's say if I go to my plugins on, and I think it's going to add our VST Connect Q mix directly here. Once we have this track, you then would come over here and, log in, and you could search for a friend or a person that you know. You could do a search for them. Once you see that person, you could see them directly in your setup. And one of the things that could be a little tricky at first is you'll have a talkback mic, so you could communicate with them if you wanted to, or you could talk on a phone if you don't have a talkback mic configuration. And as you would hit record in Cubase here, this performers, and you probably want to just have this monitor disabled. So when you go to the VST Connect here, we could see Once you're connected with the person, you could come over here and be able to adjust their audio interface. You could have their video. So if they have a webcam, you could actually see them. And at that point, it's really just hitting record. And realize that when you hit record, the signal gets sent out via the control room for the Q-Mix. So you may have to take your other channels and be able to set the Q-Mix for, so if they wanted to hear the piano channel at this point, you may have to just take this particular channel, go to its audio characteristics, and make sure that the Q send that's going out to the VST Connect, that they're able to, that each of the sources, the Q mix of what that musician is hearing is going out of this Q mix. Once that is done, the signal will go out to them. You hit record. The signal is sent over the internet. The Q mix is sent to the performer. You hit record, and then it's going to be, recorded directly into your system. So once it does that, and also if the musician wants to hear what they did, make sure you come and that their Q mix is turned on and enabled, so a lot of times I see people, it's like, oh, the musician can't hear themselves, so when reviewing it, it's because people forget to turn the Q mix on. So this Q mix through the control room is going to be sending the signals to what to the person you're recording is hearing. So once, if you want to play back what they just recorded in context, that make sure that you have this turned on for the Q mix. Now, as you do this, it's going to be, you may hit record and it may be several milliseconds, it could be a couple hundred milliseconds, but everything is going to be sent directly to the person with the VST Connect Pro so that everything is on time on their end. And when it's recorded into your system, it's going to be, maybe 100 milliseconds or whatever, depending on internet connection speeds, that is going to be recorded into time. So when you hit record, you may notice it's going to be a latency, and that's because it's compensating for the latency throughout the entire signal path. Now, as you work with VST Connect Pro, a good, stable internet connection is really important. So try whatever you can do not to use Wi-Fi, because those upload and download speeds can vary quite a bit. I had someone who's having all sorts of problems, trying to record a critical track, and their kids were watching Netflix upstairs. And when they were watching Netflix, it didn't work. It was like, okay, just, get a wired connection, go out and buy a 100-foot Ethernet cable and run that directly to your router if it's not near you. So those types of things can really make a big difference as well. So, but I think once you get into it, it's a pretty cool thing to be able to do. And it's a lot of fun, especially in our pandemic time, to be able to record people directly at home from who aren't physically present. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to some other questions. And if you've learned something new, make sure you feel free to hit the like button if you want. Okay, so we have a question. Okay, let me just... my timeline, my chat line jumped on me, so. Okay, just finding, okay, so I think I'm back to where I was. Question: how does Cubase create audio harmonies so convincingly and avoids phasiness that you might expect? There's a lot of attention paid to detail with, audio algorithms that are used, and also to make sure that, voicings for the harmonies aren't spread out like you would have for a piano voicing or a guitar voicing. So they paid a lot of attention to, what typical harmonies, are sung and what practically is done, as opposed to making it just copy from like how a piano player or guitar player would do voicings. Okay, so we have Stefan checking in from Sweden. Okay, so how can I change my Cubase 5 to 10? So I guess if you have Cubase 5 and you wanted to upgrade to 10, you could always upgrade to 10 or update, depending. So, there are promotions. You don't have to repurchase the program again. So if you have your Cubase 5, you can just simply update. If it's going back to VST 5, I don't think that there's an update path because that was 20 some years ago. So just, but if you have Cubase 5, it's no problem. Hi, Greg. Jay from Connecticut. I have 3 quick questions. 1, could you do a non-hangout video where you create and arrange an R&B song from scratch? I'd love to see your process. I'm not a songwriter or a performer, so if I had tracks, I could maybe quickly do kind of a Q&A video on like arranging and editing and building a song. But I don't, since I don't play well, it may not be so exciting to see, but if you have like a basic sketch of a song, I could show how to do something like that in a video. So question 2 or 3, this from Jay, is does surround rendering a song in 7.2 require Dolby encryption or any encryption like DTS, or can it be played back on receivers without those standards? So when you're dealing with surround sound, it depends on your receiver. Some receivers, like some of the older receivers, will allow you to have like a 5.1 analog input. And if you have that on your receiver, like, and those were to kind of match early DVD players. So a lot of times DVD players would have like a SPDIF output, as well as a toslink output to transmit 5.1 digitally to a receiver. And some of them would also have like 6 analog outputs. And the ones that had 6 analog outputs could do multiple formats like DVD-A, SACD, AC3, and DTS. Most receivers are doing 7.2, are going to be doing it now. It's hard to find, I would say. I think most receivers are just going to have maybe an optical input or or do all the multi-channel audio via HDMI. And that's harder to kind of get your audio from your computer to that. You can and have it encoded. So if you have a receiver that has the analog inputs, you could do that. But if you wanted to have the multi-channel go over the digital connection, because most of them don't have a standard multi-channel. It's not like it's an ADAT connection. It's physically the same connection, but it's not taking 8 tracks of audio at 48K. So if you wanted to do it over a optical or an HDMI, you would need to encode it probably to AC3 or to DTS file. And if you're doing Dolby Digital stuff, if you're doing like a 714 or Dolby Atmos rather, then you would need to have like the rendering. So, and as you do that, you could do encodings, and Steinberg used to sell some of the encoders for AC3 and DTS for Nuendo users, and they didn't sell very well, and they are very expensive to do AC3 and DTS encoding, especially at the time. They're about $1,000 each. So that's what it would take, and that would allow you to take a 5.1 mix, and you could mix it down to like a stereo file, a stereo encoded file that could be played back. And if you listen to it on a CD player, it'd be like, wouldn't make any sense. It would just sound like data, like playing a CD-ROM. But when you played it back and you connected it via DTS or AC3 and it was decoded, then you could do all of your surround stuff. So how it's kind of working, for receivers of the last 15 years, you're probably going to need to get especially if you're doing 7.2, you're probably going to require the Dolby encryption for that. Sorry, it's kind of a long answer, but just to give you kind of a bit of historical context. Question 303. Is it possible to route an outboard microphone preamp and route it to Cubase as an external effect? Don't always want to use that mic for the same thing, or unplug where it is. So you could definitely take anything that has, audio ins and outs and go to the audio connections under your studio menu and go to external effects and define where the input and output are coming from. And at this point, you could choose to, if you have like a compressor, you could just say, I want it. And so you say this is, it's connected to, you're going to need to connect it to your audio interface. And so make sure you have enough inputs and outputs from your audio interface. And at that point, you could call up, once that's configured, if you wanted to run signal through the mic pre, you could just simply go to your inserts and you'll see external effects. So you see external plugins. So you can say, I wanted to run it through, my DBX. And when you see this, you could adjust kind of the gain structure if needed. But by time, often it's going out of the converter into the device, and especially if it's like an older digital reverb, they're going to have their own latencies within the system. It could be delayed or out of time, out of sync, and out of phase with your existing track. So you have this little ping system, and that will measure the latency of the signal path and automatically compensate for the latency for your outboard path. Generally, people don't run mic pre's as external effects, but you could definitely do it, because a lot of times the mic pre is going to be used on the input stage, but there's a lot of times people are using like a mic pre combination EQ compressor, like a channel strip type of function, and you could definitely have that set up like that. Okay. Okay, so just seeing our comments, a great question on 7.1. I've always wanted to know if you could run a DTS code to all signals come through an optical from your device into a digital AV. Yeah, so if you wanted to do DTS or AC3, you're just going to need to get it encoded. So, and I think, again, most of the receivers are going to need to see it encoded. So, I still have some old, like there's a Magic Pioneer DVD player that could play back like every format. And I have a receiver that still has 6 analog inputs for that reason. And, but it's pretty tricky to, listen to your surround sound appropriately in like a home setup unless it's been encoded. All right, good to see Michael Teams on Hangout from Weatherford, Texas. Okay, just reading through different comments. Okay, so we have a question from Ted. Any way to assign user-defined MIDI chords of specific inversions to notes up and down the keyboard? So let's, might be able to do this. Let's check this out. Let me jump projects. All right, so there is a MIDI plugin, and I haven't used this in forever, but this might be able to do this. It's called a Chord plugin. Let's take a look. And I think what this could allow you to do is so let's say if I play one. So you could assign different chords. Let me just see. Okay, so if I so it's for single chords. Let's check out so it looks like you could have, you know, different chords for each key that you could press here. And I haven't really, let's say I'll just reset this. See if I can figure out how to just do a chord. So but I think if you kind of play around with this, so when I hit a note here, all right, so let's do a learn. Okay, and come here. Let's do. You could just do a learn function. Maybe select a chord here, and so let's say if I want this to be a. Okay. All right, so it's just seeing some more discussion on getting the surround sound to play back. So Jazz Dude is helping out. Okay, so I have a question on Control Room in 10.5 Pro. Can you show the best ideas to safe ear from sound spikes when using headphones, ear curvy cue corrections. I think you have more tips to show used in control room. Okay, so if you have, if you're worried about like headphone, like so spikes when using headphones, what I would do and what I've seen a lot of people do is just to come over here to the, if you go to the different cue mixes here, and, a lot of times you don't have feedback, so much on in-ears, and that's kind of, or headphones. But if you see each of the different cue mixes here and then click on inserts, select a cue mix, and you may just have to, let's come here and just open up like a limiter plugin. So a lot of times what this would allow you to do is just to, under dynamics, and choose just to put a brick wall limiter. And this point, you could have it all, just in the headphone mix, and you could just kind of bring down the actual value of the brick wall limiter. And I would do that, and that's not going to affect any of the signal flow that's being recorded. It's only going to affect the actual, what the musician is hearing in their headphones. So you could do that for each of the different, so I will just come over here. Let me just, my QMix program didn't like that. Let me see if I can get my computer back. Sorry. So just run in the plugin section. So go to the QMix area. And all you need to do is for each of the cue mixes, make sure you have the inserts selected. And at that point, just run like a limiter in there. And that should kind of make sure that there's not any loud spikes that could go through and kind of damage hearing, or monitoring while wearing headphones. So it says, I'm not a user of Cubase, but I'm aware that it is the most complete DAW in the market. But I want to know how powerful is this sampling in Cubase and how fast you can get interesting vocal chops. So let me just open up a project here. So I will just take this project. And we could do like vocal chops really quickly in Groove Agent. So let's take a look. So let's say I have a vocal going on here. So we'll just play just a little bit of it to give you some context. And let me just check my connections. Okay. So I'm just going to add a VST instrument of Groove Agent. And you could do this in Hallian as well, but the Groove Agent SE is included. So I will take just kind of like a rhythmic part of this. Put this into combined mode. Let's just take that. I'm going to drag it to a pad here. So all right, so if I want to, I'm just going to choose a different area for sample start. So let's say into the night. I turn it up, you wouldn't mind. So let's say if I just want to play. Okay, so Okay, so if I
box is ready to leave. Our musical history laid out on the floor. I've got.
All right, so if I want to come here, let me just do a quick reset of my MIDI notes. All right, so if I wanted to take this and go to slice, so we'll go to edit, and then you'll see just a slice menu. You could choose to create slices, and you could set the threshold kind of accordingly. So you can say, okay, I just want to have like really low threshold, and at this point, it's now just taken each of these particular slices. And let me just unsolo here. So you could just trigger it.
Please, 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 please.
And you could set these for each slice if you wanted to. So that's just really quick ways that you could do some vocal slices and, you know, have creative control and change MIDI notes around as well. Okay. Yeah, so some more discussion on, like, you know, how to test in, you know, for like a surround mix, you know. So Jazz Dude's giving some great advice as always. Thank you, Jazz Dude. All right. So we have Millard Brown checking in from Pennsylvania. Hope you're doing well. Okay. Okay, so I see just a question from Range Control. Says, I'm also wondering if Waves NX technology is compatible with Ambisonics of Nuendo, as well as Waves Ambisonics. Like, are Ambisonics an open standard or semi-proprietary to brand? So Ambisonics is more of a format, and it doesn't necessarily involve proprietary encoding, decoding. So... yeah, and as Jazz Dude mentioned, you know, the Surcode Dolby encoder is $1,200. So to do that, you know, it does generally cost money to work with. All right, so question, is there a Formant shift in Cubase other than Very Audio? Try to achieve a chipmunk slowed vocal effects. Thanks. Yeah, so one of the things that a lot of people miss, let's say if I'm just doing this on my lead vocal here, is a pitch shift plugin. So we go here to inserts to pitch shift, and we'll go to pitch correct. And then here you could and this is just your Formant here. So you could do like Joni Mitchell from the 60s. And in the 80s. And more contemporary Joni Mitchell. So just come right over here, and you can do the Formant shifts, and you could just choose where you want to be, male or female. If you want to do preservation on or off, so let's say I want to do female. Make her sound younger.
Okay. Suddenly it's Beatles or Stars.
were originally, and just shifting to Formant. And I know a lot of people that will do that for like background vocals. You know, we had the one singer who sang multiple background vocals, and they'll just kind of adjust the formants a little bit to make sure that, you know, it sounds like different, you know, like different flavor of voices that are being used in a project. So check out the Pitch Correct plugin, and I think that will do exactly what you want to use. So just see, hi Greg, last hangout I have asked about chord track staying active for one shot, even if muted after hitting play. It's not about acoustic feedback. Thanks. So maybe if you could, if you want to email me, maybe with some more detail, or if you have more detail of, you know, what you wanted, you know, I could check, I could, you know, do a little more research on it. Okay. Okay, so just reading through different questions. So question, how do I find the tempo and key of a song project? I import it into Cubase. So if you have the tempo, you know, there's a number of different ways. So let's, I'll just open up. Just open up a quick project. So there's no way to automatically tell the key from an audio file. That's quite accurate. But if you wanted to do it for tempo, you could do that quite effectively. So if I have a piece like this, where the tempo track was just recorded freely, you know, at this point, I could go to my project. So there's no correlation between the beats and what is going on. So I will go to my tempo detection. And I'll do an analysis of it. And here it's on the offbeat, so you could do stuff like double time or offbeat correction. So now it's extracted the tempo of that particular file. And if I wanted to now just kind of find the downbeat, and it's change the time signature to 1/4, and it's figuring out kind of what the beat is. So at this point, that's where our downbeat is. And that's all you have to do. So that's how you can find a tempo of a track. And if it's a song project, you know, and if it has a MIDI part, like a piano, you know, for MIDI parts, you know, like we saw previously. So if I'm here, we could just go to so, you know, if you have the MIDI parts, you could just do a create chord symbols like we showed previously. Okay, so question coming from Pro Tools, where in a MIDI track or audio track you could record a take, then decide to record a new one by creating a new playlist in that track. It's really just a new take. How in Cubase? All you have to do is come here, and they call it track versions. So just kind of click to the right. If you hover the mouse over the name, just choose new version, and that would be, you know, the same concept that you would have for playlist in others. And you could do it for tempo tracks, you could do it for chord tracks, you could do it for MIDI tracks, instrument tracks, audio tracks as well. So once again, just kind of come over here, and if you wanted to do that for all these, you could just say under project, you'd see track versions, and you could just say new versions, and then you could, piece those together as needed. So undo that and go right back. Okay. Just reading through some comments on Atmos and VR. Okay, good to see Terry Dean on a Hangout. All right, so we see JVI from Netherlands. Good to see you on a Hangout. Okay. Okay, I see Agent K is just saying thumbs up for Greg. So if you want to hit the thumbs up button, I won't disagree. And if you haven't subscribed to the Cubase YouTube channel, make sure you do that. All right, we see Terry Dean just had tacos. Thanks for sharing. You have to bring it for everyone in the class next time. All right. Okay. Okay, so just reading through more comments. There's some discussion of ambisonics and kind of artificial surround sound, different concepts. And I'd say Jazz Dude is pretty much dead on accurate. So, okay, reading through comments still. So I just see a comment. Will this function with a single voice? So I'm not sure if that's like harmonies or chords or doing like the formants, but yeah. So pretty much all those can, work with the single voice. All right. So question, how can I export stems with master effects on? So currently, if you wanted to export stems with kind of the master effects on, what you could do instead of having, let me just open up in our project. So, so let's say I have a project here and I will just add like a really goofy master effect. So let's say if I have like my master effect, I'll put a flanger on. And I wanted to make stems. So instead of, when we do our export audio mix down here, you could choose to do multiple files, but this won't include the different processing that's on the master effects. So what you can do is just to, let's say I'll we could do this for one at a time or do this for multiple. And so let's say I want to take this kick and this snare, and I want to do, if you go to edit and choose to do a render in place, and you can do this for all your projects, all your files. And at this point, I'll just go to render settings, and I'll say using complete signal path, including master effects. So at this point, we'll just say render, and it'll take just a couple minutes. But you could select all the files in your project and render and include the master effects. Okay, so now we can see our outputs that are carried over here. So now I can listen to my kick with, and if I did everything right, we should hear the flanger on it. And now when I go to my snare, so that way it's including all of your channel strips, your inserts, your EQs, your send effects, and your master effects. So, and in doing this, it muted the original source tracks. So when we look at this, those tracks are muted and they've been rendered as the stereo files directly underneath. So that will include everything. So instead of doing an export audio mix down, just choose to do select all the files and do a render in place with the complete signal path. So that's how you could do that quite easily. Okay, when using a MIDI VST instrument with multiple output channels, for example, kick, snare, etc., how can I record the output to audio tracks? Do I have to route each output to a separate audio track? So let's just jump back to another project quickly. I'll revert this one. And just let me switch projects. So let's say we'll quickly do a jump off here. We'll activate this project, and I'll just drag over a file here. So let's go to like a drum file. I'll just drag over this over here. So, there's a couple ways of doing it. You could do a render in place. So let's say I have this. I will come over here. So let's say I'll just kind of play this. So now if I want to, like while we're playing this, I could go to the mixer in the device, and I'll say kick is going out of that output, snare out of output 2, output 3 for hi-hat, output 4 for overheads, and output 5 for room mics. So now all of these different sources will be just kind of mapped out for you. And if I do just a render in place, so I'll go to my render settings. I'll just say we'll include the channel settings, or you could even just do dry. And at this point, you could just say render. And then you could have your kick track rendered out. And then overheads and room mics. So there's a reverb snare that kind of snuck in, but that's just kind of an easy way of doing it. You could also record it, if you wanted to then send these audio tracks Let's say I will unmute the source tracks here. And if you wanted to record it as audio, and let's say if you wanted to have this be kind of a mixed audio where you have, mono and stereo tracks, we could add 5, let's say I wanted to add group channels. So say I want my, I'll just add 3 mono groups. So say, okay, so we'll add 3 mono groups. We will add 2 stereo groups. And then if we wanted to, as we come here, we could add 3 mono audio tracks. And let's say 2 stereo. So at this point, I could take those outputs from the instrument. So as I want to go to routing, we could take the Groove Agent instruments, route these to the groups. So let me just play. So now we'll look at our mix console and I'll say, okay, our kick is going out to group 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then our audio tracks. So we see our groups being populated, and we can take our audio tracks and set the inputs from group 1, group 2, group 3, and then from group 4 and group 5. And then all I had to do is place these particular tracks here into record enable. And just hit record. And then this is passing the multi-channel different outputs to the groups in mono and stereo, passing them to audio channels in mono and stereo. So as we listen to it, you can just see a mono kick, a mono snare if you want, your hi-hats and stereo rooms and overheads. So there's 2 different approaches that you could do that with. Okay, let me just, my timeline jumped on me, so bear with me. Let me see if I can get back. Okay, hi Greg. I think it's Mircia from Dallas. I want to use Cubase 10.5 for live performance. It's possible. A Cubase project with some instruments and to add voice and MIDI controller live. Yeah, people do this all the time. So, you can have all of your backing tracks handled directly here. So just like you would play back a normal project, you could have virtual instruments loaded up. So at this point, if you wanted to play back, a piano sound, so any of your virtual instruments you could have as like, if you wanted to have like Hallian Sonic SE instruments or Hallian instruments, you could, just come here. Let's say I wanted a, Rhodes or Whirly, whatever you wanted to search for, any of your particular sounds. So that could be played live, and open up an audio track and just have your vocal effects directly on there. If you have like a Steinberg UR interface, you could also use that because it has the built-in DSP, playback your tracks, playback, we have lots of groups that play back MIDI drums from an electronic kit. They do the guitar through the VST amp rack, the bass through the VST bass amp, and the vocals, and do all the processing. And, can just run a stereo out to the front of house and, come up with great results doing that. But, probably one of the more elaborate live schemes I've seen was Donny Osmond for his Vegas show, and Donnie and Marie, they just wrapped up, I think, this past year. But when they, and I think they did about 10 years on Vegas, but they had some backing tracks, but they had video playing out of Cubase for all the video that was being triggered. And they just had it synced via MIDI timecode to 4 other machines that just had video in various Cubase projects. They had the in-ears, all the in-ear mixing done in Cubase, and they could have different parts of the show that they could put into a loop where the musicians were vamping. They could have backing tracks like strings and some extra harmony voices and stuff like that, and and I believe Donnie even automated the front of house mix, so that he could take his live computer rig anywhere and have the show be, incredibly consistent, and have the musicians play along with the backing tracks with a click. And, it worked phenomenally well for him. And, Donnie actually spent a lot of time getting that set up and did it himself. He's incredibly technical and just, as nice a guy as you could imagine. So... But you could definitely use Cubase for live advantage, for live work. People do it all the time. So I see a question, is there a way to line up direct input guitar and dirty guitar simultaneously, but have the dirty signal follow the direct input edits? I hope that makes sense. So a lot of times when you're doing... some different aspects like that. So let's say if I come here and I'll just duplicate this track. And let's say if I take these 2 tracks and one is maybe a direct guitar, one is through an amp, and you've gone in and done some, processing and edits. So a lot of times when you do this, some of the edits can be grouped together. So if you're here, you could hit Control or Command G. And that way, when you do an edit on one, that edit will be applied to both of them. So if I wanted to, I'll just make this a little larger so we could see it more obviously. So if I'm here and I wanted to do, move those different elements or do slip editing on both, a lot of times you could do this. Now, if you get into a lot of stuff where you're doing audio warping, where you may go into the sample editor, and if you start getting into audio warp editing, where you're maybe moving different devices, I think that's going to apply it to one of the files, but you could just easily switch between the 2 different files. But if you find that you've done audio warp editing on, one of the files and not the other, you could see both of the files if they're selected here. So, once you're here, you could switch back and say, oh, I need to move this to visually line up. You could see whatever parts are selected. And if you've done changes on one and it's not quite lining up as you would want there, you could just do an alignment. So check out the audio alignment. You could say, this is, we could ungroup it, just Command or Control plus U, and say, okay, I've done this. This is my source track. and then I wanted to have my destination track, and then you could do an alignment between those two. So there's a couple different techniques for that. Okay, so hello all. Was there a session on VST expression mapping detail tutorial anytime I've missed? Hope someone can help me by sharing any link. There is a pretty detailed expression mapping, so it could depend, but a lot of times when you're kind of working with, and it could be, there's two different expressions, so I assume that you're doing it maybe with expression maps. So let's go ahead and see if we can take a quick look. I think I have a Schubert piece that we could open up here. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. And if you've learned something new, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Okay, so let's go ahead and just listen. So, when you go into expression maps for different devices, so I will come over here and double click. And what an expression map is going to allow you to do is to actually create our different articulations. So as you play different instruments for different sample libraries, you may notice that these different instruments may have different levels of articulation. So when I want to go to my, we see these keys here for violin, these could switch between, trills, whole tone, trills, half tone, so whether you want it to be short or long notes. So as we listen to it, and this is going to be just the Hallian Symphonic Orchestra, and I go into you could have expression maps. Now, some instruments like Hallian can automatically generate expression maps for you. So that's kind of a huge deal. Otherwise, you could make your own expression maps, and you could do this by going to the MIDI to expression map setup. So when I wanted to come here, I could see all the different articulations that are in this particular violin patch. So if I wanted to come here, I could select a different articulation. So let's say, I think if I come here. So and all these articulations will be mapped here. Now, if you're building an expression map from start, you could just start off and say you wanted to, add a map or remove a map, but you could just say, I wanted to just come over here, and you could actually just start completely from scratch. Now, as you do this, you could add different MIDI notes. You could choose to have different CC messages, and this, like in this library, we see that these different notes will switch between these articulations. And once you have this set up, and a lot of times, these are pretty common for, composers to do this, and these expression maps are shared pretty frequently. So now that we have the expression maps, we can, let's take a listen just to the violin. So if I wanted those 30-second notes or 16th notes there to articulate better, I could just come and say, okay, I just want that to switch to spiccato for those shorter notes and then back to legato. So that's going to send a key switch to the sample library. And if I wanted this to be pits, going back to legato. So that way, we see a lot of people that would have like 30 different tracks for violin one, and each of those would be different expressions. And it was just kind of a nightmarish scenario to work with. So this way we have one track and we could see all the available articulations for the sample library within the one track. And when we go to the score editor, all the expressions have been written directly into the score editor as well. So you can see legato, go back to pits, spiccato on those notes, legato back, and as we slide over, we could see, okay, here we're going to go to pizzicato for different notes, and so this way you could see all of your different articulations that are available and be able to have access to all the sounds that the sound design team for your sample library has created for you. Okay, just reading through questions. Okay, so I see a question. Hi, my track pans right when pressing a sustain pedal. What can I do? So if you hit a sustain pedal and your track is going to the right, I wonder if maybe you have sustain pedal being remapped to a different controller. So, it generally doesn't do that. So I would check to see if if you select the track here, if you have an input transformer. An input transformer could, if it's set, you see this little squiggly line. Here you could have a sustain pedal turn a sustain pedal MIDI continuous controller message into a MIDI pan message. So you could do that directly from the input transformer. But if you're probably asking, that's something you have to kind of deliberately do. So it's usually people, only do that if you've taken the time to do that. But what I would check out is when you hit the sustain pedal, that's probably going to be CC64, I think. Go to your MIDI inserts on that particular track, and you'll see a MIDI monitor. And then as you hit different, so when I come here, I think I have a sustain pedal somewhere under my desk. Okay, so when I hit a sustain pedal here, this is just going to see, I see, continuous controller 64, I release, so then I get 0. So I press down, I get to 127, I release, I get 0. So make sure that when you're hitting the sustain, go to the MIDI monitor plugin, and you may have to just enable it and see what MIDI message is actually coming in. It could be that your controller keyboard is remapping that. So if you hit your sustain pedal here and you're seeing like MIDI panning go all the way to the right, which would be a 127 value. So if you see like this labeled as CC10 when you hit your sustain pedal, that's something in your MIDI controller that's being transmitted for your sustain message. So I think it's probably going to be in your MIDI controller settings as opposed to something in Cubase. But open up the MIDI monitor, turn it on, and hit the sustain pedal like I'm doing now, and you could see what is actually going on and what incoming MIDI messages your controller is transmitting to Cubase. To see a comment from the range control. Greg, thank you so much. It's been so hard to find surround answers. Yeah, I mean, I've been doing surround sound stuff since like 2000. So I've been through, when there was a lot of money coming in for repurposing of different surround content. And I got to help a lot of people with that, like Elliot Shiner, especially. I got to help a bit when he was doing Queens, like Night at the Opera, and working with Chuck Ainlay and other people that, are really great surround mixers. So, I've done a lot of stuff in surround, and it's just kind of a mess of delivery formats. And one of the interesting things was, Sony was paying a lot of money for guys to remix like great classic records in surround. But all of a sudden, at one point, like Microsoft Xbox came. This is kind of a global economy thing. Microsoft Xbox came out with a newer version, and Sony PlayStation sales dropped significantly. But it was the profit from Sony PlayStation sales that was funding Sony doing reauthoring and remixing of content in surround sound. So once Xbox had a couple of good quarters and Sony PlayStation sales went down, and then they dried up and stopped doing all sorts of, the budgets for remixing and surround sound dried up with that. So a lot of content was never realized, and budgets got cut. And now we're seeing some more stuff. I know I just spoke with Elliot Shiner, and I think he's working on a James Taylor, Carole King record, and Steely Dan's Royal Scam, and he's mixing it Innuendo for Aura 3D, and he seems to feel that's a much better format than Dolby Atmos, what he was communicating to me, especially for music. So, but it's really tricky with different, encoding options and encoding options that go away. So it is kind of the Wild West still a bit. Okay. Going through some more to see. I guess my jazz chords, I was the Herbie Hancock of Cubase doing that. So I've gotten to help Herbie out over the years a couple times too. So it's always a joy. Okay, so see question. Okay, so my snap to grid is turned on, but snap not working properly after you use metronome click pattern level for grid emphasis, even if I unchecked it. So let's go ahead and take a look. I'll just revert this quickly and we'll jump back. So thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, so just okay, so when we're working with, so say it says my snap to grid is turned off. Okay, so I'm just going to take this loop file here. So let me just zoom in. We'll make it nice and big so everyone can see. I'll make this a little shorter. Okay, so, and if I turn off my snap to grid hitting the letter J, at this point, I could move this freely to any position. If I wanted this to snap to different time intervals, such as bar, I could come here and now it's only going to snap to bar. We could also use quantize. So if I have my quantize value set to 16th notes, we can now snap this, just for people who aren't familiar with this function. You could also use, so instead of quantize, adapt to zoom. So if we're zoomed in, we could see our different snap functions based upon your level of zoom. So if I'm out here, it's probably just going to be to bar. If I zoom in a little bit, we could be to eighth note. If we zoom out, we could go to quarter note probably. So we're still eighth note, quarter. So this is kind of how some of this snap stuff works. And if we have, let's say let's come over here and we'll have a signature track. I'll just add quickly. And now let's say if I want this to be in 7/8. And let's say we have a click pattern of, let's say, 3 + 4. Okay. And then I think it's under... Let me just see if I can remember. So if we right-click here, we could now use the metronome click pattern level for grid line emphasis. So now that I'm in 7/8, so let's just make sure. All right, so. All right, so. Okay, so we have. Okay, so my snap grid is turned on, but snap not working properly after you use metronome click pattern level for grid line emphasis, even after unchecked it. So when I'm here, let me just find my audio sample here. So. Okay, so here now that we are in our metronome pattern, we can see this as like we have our 3 + 4. So now that I have that, we could see the grid line emphasis. And okay, we could see the grid line emphasis here, but it's still set to, let's say I have this set to use quantize. So I see my emphasis here. So now I could go to bars, and let's say if I go to beat, I could see that. And if I go to, adapt to zoom, at that point, that all the snap options still seem to be kind of working as expected, Tanmay. If I'm misunderstanding your question, just kind of let me know. But it seems like everything's functioning as I would expect. And then if I hit J to turn it off, my snap can freely be placed anywhere that I want. So, but now I hit J to turn snap on. That's going to snap and kind of follow the different values here as set. To see comment from Jazz Dude, Maiden Voyage is one of Greg's demo songs. If you don't know it, go to YouTube and search. It's a great song by Herbie Hancock. Yeah, my friend Clay did a really kind of high quality MIDI sequence of that, and my friend Clay Oswald, he's often on the Hangouts. Just incredibly talented musician, producer, engineer. Has done a lot of work with Gloria Estefan probably for 30 years or so. Musical director and Broadway musician. Okay. Okay. Okay, so we have a question from how do I upload my key command from Logic Pro to Cubase Pro, because I am like the key commands from Logic Pro rather than Cubase Pro. So, there's no direct translation, but if we go to your key commands here, there are different presets. So I think if you wanted to have, I'm not sure if Logic allows you to, probably does. I don't use it, but you may be able to switch your key commands. So you could have the default key commands here, and just be able to load in your Logic key commands, and that'll probably be the default ones. But it may, if you have them customized, it's not going to translate those, and you'll just have to kind of manually change them and save them. Okay. But just a quick comment, just saying, you mastered your key commands in Logic, and it would save you a lot of hours. I think learning, my tip to anyone that's learning, how to run Cubase is always just sit down and learn the key commands, and you're always better. So, but I completely understand that you probably have a lot of muscle memory that's stuck if you've been running other programs for a long time. So you see, hi Greg, I'm loving the Hangout sessions. Do you have any advice, recommendations on setting up a project template for sampling sessions? How do you organize your samples? What I do, a lot of times is I think I just kind of created just to show this after our last Hangout, so I wouldn't have to spend a bunch of time recreating it. But so I've got this question a couple times, like how to sample inside of Hallian. So let's say I have like a Rhodes patch in Hallian Sonic SE. So you could do that. And sometimes what I've done, if I'm sampling audio, I'll show you an example of, I think I may have a session here. Like I was doing samples of my bass, my jazz bass, a 60s jazz bass. Let me see if I have the project. Okay, yeah. So, and what I did, and this is just to kind of keep naming conventions. Let me see if this, I haven't opened up this project probably ever on this computer, but I'll take a look at it. So what I did was just to kind of, I had each of the notes labeled. So I created a number of audio tracks here. And I created them for, E string, A string, D, and G string. So at this point, I could come right over here because I wanted to sample each note so that I had the option of, playing a G as an open string G, or the 5th fret on the D string, the 10th fret on the A string, or the 15th fret on the E string. So that I could switch and choose the different samples, and I set up a key switch for this. So I labeled each of these notes like so that when I just sampled directly from an audio source, that the pitch would be part of the name of the audio file so that Hallian could automatically sort it. So what I would do is just kind of come directly here, and I would hit one note, let it go the full length, and I think maybe if I just even... So if I wanted to just, audition the different samples, and you could choose like, okay, this is going to be, different strings. So I would play a note, let it sustain out, then play an F note. let it sustain out. And I could just do one recording and just hit the down arrow, and that would have an audio file that was the length, like roughly the length of the note that I played, and with the pitch name. And then you could just drag and drop these and have these automatically sampled directly in. And this was before Hallion had kind of its own. This is probably Hallion 4 or Hallion 5 when I did this. So that's an easy way for like like a piano or an instrument. Now, if it's an actual MIDI source that you're doing, you could come, let's say we'll go back to this particular file. So I will take this, I have, let's say, a Fender Rhodes, and I'm going to open up Hallion here. And Hallion has, it's a Dare to Dream, a sampler that can sample. So I will just open this up, and let's say I want to start sampling. So there's kind of like preset window configurations, and I could say, let's just do sample recording, and I'm going to just activate this. We could say I want it to be with my MIDI note start on and my note start off, and I want it to the input source is coming from here. So, and what I've done is created a sidechain in Hallion to this Hallion Sonic SE. So now I release the note. All right, I hit the next note. And if I didn't like that, say I didn't get the attack right, I'd just come back here. And you can do multiple velocity layers if you want it. And we can see that these samples are just being added into Hallion. And we can see the sample tree here. And it's capturing the MIDI note message. So for the note on, note off. And now, you could just do that, and you could just have all of your different Hallion samples done, just directly there. So you could sample directly into Hallion that way. So, those are some different techniques to do for sampling. And I've also set up like MIDI files where I'll take the same note, the same MIDI note, and I'll do 8 or 16 velocity levels. And then the next, then I do the next pitch, 8 velocity values. The next pitch, 8 velocity values. And you could hit play, have Cubase, play the MIDI information for a hardware device or software instrument and give it enough space between. And at that point, you could just have play a MIDI file in Cubase, and it could kind of automate the whole process of sampling for you. So those are a couple tips for sampling into Cubase. All right. All right. So I see Sub 403 that the pitch correct plugin that did exactly what he's looking for. All right, glad that helped. Okay, so question from Tanmay: how can I make the same key command work for undoing something I did? Example: mute is mute, but how can I set it so when I press it again on a muted event, it unmutes? So a lot of times, let's go ahead and take a quick look. Some of the plugins and some of the functions allow you to kind of toggle. So let's take a look. So let's say if I come here, we could mute an event and unmute the event. So I think that there might be just like a key command for that. So let me just take a look. It could be like a mute selection or something like that. But let's just, right, so mute events is Shift M. So now I'll just come here. Okay, but let's see if I could. So, some of the functions in Cubase will be set up to, to toggle. And sometimes you could have the same key command, mute event and unmute events. But let's take a look because I think there might be. So there's mute and unmute objects, and that's Option M. So when I come here, I'm just going to hit Alt or Option M. That'll mute and unmute. So a lot of the functions themselves may like toggle status or mute, unmute to kind of go back and forth. So I think that's a default key command of just Alt or Option plus M to do that. Okay. So question, when my controller has predefined controls, can I change the operation of those controls? For example, use my pitch bend wheel to control my wah-wah. So a lot of times, we could remap different things. So if you wanted to, sometimes, pitch bend could be a little different. So sometimes pitch bend may not be the best one because pitch bend could have, more values, and it's not technically a MIDI continuous controller message. I think it's a MIDI system common message, but let's see if we could remap pitch bend. So let's say if I'm here, let's take a look at the input transformer and see if we could do this. So I will click on this little squiggly line right underneath the edit channel settings, and we'll choose this to be local. So let's say I want to do function and transform, and let's say type is equal to pitch bend, and let's make this do and let's say type is set to controller, and let's say value 1. We'll say set to fixed value, and let's say 11 for expression. So now I'll make sure to activate this, that when I do my pitch bend wheel, that's going to send like MIDI CC 11. So let's see if I did that correctly. I'll go to my MIDI monitor. Yeah, so that's all you need to do. So once again, to do that, so this is taking your pitch bend wheel and mapping it to a different MIDI CC. So once again, we'll say under function, we want to choose transform, type is equal to pitch bend. Under action target, so this is what is coming in, and the bottom part we could think of is what it's actually doing, what we want it to do, how we want to modify and change that, what action do we want this incoming target to do. So at this point, we're going to say type is set to a fixed value, and you can say controller, And then we have to define which controller it is. So we can say, and value 1 is the MIDI CC message. And we'll say we're going to set this to fixed value channel or MIDI CC 11. So if you want it to be modulation, just type in 1. And then as you move your pitch bend wheel, it can do and control other functions kind of freely. And you can set up 4 different conditions like that as well within one input transformer. Okay. I can't get to import my MP4 video file to Cubase 10.5 video extracted from Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. So a lot of times, we can think of video files as being a bit different than something we're used to working with WAV file. So a WAV file is, an actual file format, but a video file like an MP4, so an MP4, we could think of that as a container file, and that could have different codecs that are being used for that. So an MP4 file is not going to universally play on everything. So you probably want to use, maybe like an H.264, so you may have to use a shareware utility program. I think people use Handbrake, if memory serves, to convert your different file formats. And if you look on the Cubase website and just say, best video formats for Cubase, it will tell you, what to have it encoded to. So what you want to do is basically to re-encode and decode the video file. So once it's in kind of a more common format, you should be fine to have it work within Cubase. But once again, an MP4 file can have like 100 different versions of MP4 files. So it's really going to matter, your container and the codec that you're using in conjunction with that. So just do a quick search on, video formats for, Nuendo, Cubase, and Dorco, and you'll get the website and, check out there's lots of freeware programs to convert this, and it's, just so different than dealing with a WAV file that will kind of universally be recognized. So I see also from Paul, who had a question about the mapping pitch bend to control wah-wah. It says also foot control also wants to control volume. So if you have something that's doing volume, like a foot control, and you wanted to transform that using kind of, if you have something that's a volume pedal and you want it to be expression to map to a wah-wah pedal, to change that, what you do is we want to take type is equal to controller, and let's say it's volume, and you realize that that's going to be transmitting controller 7. So if you want to change the MIDI volume message from controller 7 to controller 11 to control the wah-wah, you could just come here and say value 1, and we want to add 4. So we go from CC7 to CC11. So, or if, so you have to figure out kind of what the controller is, and then you could add and subtract the whatever controller number that is within the MIDI specification. All right, so we see Cap 10 NRG or Cap 10 Energy Music saying hi to everyone. All right. Okay, so comment from Pablo, the track versions, it's amazing. I use it a lot when recording drums. Okay. Okay, quick question, how to render every single note in Key Editor. I have drums and I want to export every one shot, one by one, from Kiev, from Danilo. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. So if you wanted to do it like from the Key Editor, there's a couple of different ways to do it. let's say I have a number of, like, I'll just quickly revert this. You may, there's some handy things if you just do it within a drum editor. So let's say if I just wanted to do something like this. So let's say I have a VST instrument and I have like a pattern. So I'll drag a pattern out onto my timeline. And this has, so we look at it in a key editor, but, check out the drum editor as well. So if I have this part, within the drum editor, you could also solo each drum sound, which is helpful. But if you wanted to split out each of these, one method you could do is to go to MIDI and choose to dissolve part. So I'll just have this part selected to MIDI and choose to dissolve part. And you could separate pitches. All right. And then once you've done that, all right, still loading up our different instruments. Okay, so now it's separated so that this is only one pitch, that's another pitch. I could select these and come right over here and just do a render in place. So I'll just say use the current settings, and it's just going to go through and render those files out for you so you can see just the actual MIDI parts muted. You could disable them. So that's one way of doing it. Some people will also just take, the one part here. We showed earlier how you could do some of the, drum editing parts, but I've seen some people that when they want to do it will just, go to the drum editor and choose to solo, particular drums. And I think if we come here, we could, so say if I just solo just my kick, I could come, I think. Okay, so I will take this as a drum map. So at this point, I will, if I'm using Groove Agent or Hallion, it could automatically create the drum map for you. So, and now at this point, I could just say, okay, we're going to have, and I could say, let's just solo a particular sound. So I could just say, okay, I want to. So, some of the, and some people I know will just, run the audio out in real time through a group into a channel and then just, do it that way as well. But, check out the render in place options. All right, so question, can you tell me how to place the playhead on the selected position when clicked on a MIDI and audio event instead of clicking on the timeline bar without pressing the shift modifier key? So, really if I move, if I'm here, so, if you want to, there's a couple ways. So, if you want to just move and it'll just, okay. So if you don't want that, just, I know you don't want to hold down the shift modifier key, but I think if you just hold down Alt and Shift wherever you click, that will do that, because otherwise when you come here, you could select the event, but if you hold down Alt and Shift, and I think there may be just a preference that you might be able to set also for clicking in empty spaces. Might be under editing. Just take a quick look, see if it could be maybe transport. So if you have just locate. So if you go to preferences, transport, locate when clicked in empty space, you could just move there, or Alt Shift in the middle of an event. Because if you just click on the event, you select the event. But if you Alt Shift or Alt Option plus Shift, that will move the locator to wherever you are, or you select the event, or you could just click freely just by having that preference enabled. So again, if you come over here to preferences, transport, locate when clicked in empty space, and try that. Okay. Just reading through questions. Okay, just reading through again. So thanks for all the great comments and all the people helping. And my timeline just jumped. So in my chat field, so let me just scroll back. Hi, Greg. How can I get the EQ of one channel on a big screen? Okay, so if you wanted to just see kind of the big EQ, if you come here, you could just see kind of the EQ by itself directly there. You could also, pick and choose that you only see particular parts. And then you could place that onto any monitor that you have. And you could also, if you keep this always on top, whatever channel that you do select can just be reflected there. So, but if I'm misunderstanding, let me know. Okay, see a nice comment. Greg, thank you so much. You are the best. Glad to help. And as Michael Team says, Greg is es la leche. So it's kind of an inside joke. Apparently that's, I was taught in Spanish that it means I'm the milk, but apparently it's a flattering thing, according to Pablo. All right. Okay. And as Jazz Dude mentioned on his Discord, Cubase Discord channel, he has tons of expression maps for different sample libraries. So if you have that. So question, hello, Greg, could you please run through how to get Notepad to print? Okay, so if you have like all of your Notepad data here, I think I have a project with it. Let me see if I... Okay, so let's say if I have this particular project, and this one I did a lot of Notepad data. So at this point, let's say like when I go to my notepads on different tracks, I could see that we'll have like notes, like, what microphone was used. And as I select different tracks, we'll have, okay, this is a drum loop. It was tambourine to add, more rhythm and chorus. This is the vocal double. So, we could have notes for different tracks. And these will also be visible in the mix console. So if you wanted to go to the little setup window, you could see Notepad data directly here in the mix console. So you could actually kind of document like different things within the session. And one thing that a lot of people miss in a project, there's a notepad for the entire project. So once you have this set up, you could go to Notepad. And here what I have in a project notepad is I have, almost like old track sheets from studio sessions. You could have the name, you could have the composer, copyright information, tempo. I put the lyrics in because this is all just different, important data that could travel with the project. So I have notes on individual tracks. I may have like the name of the instrument that was used, a preset. So if it's a MIDI file that's going to another program, they could just go, okay, it's this preset in this instrument with these settings. So I used to have to do this when I worked in New York as a second assistant in big studio sessions. I was a guy that documented sessions. And this is something that's really lacking in a lot of workflows. Now, to get all of this information kind of coalesced, we could come here and say, let's go to export, and you'll see Notepad data. So now that I open up my Notepad data, I'll save. And at this point, I could see here's the global Notepad data. Here's all the information for the different tracks. And it's a text file. So this could be loaded into any program. And then really all I have to do is just choose to print. So I would just come here to print, and that's my text file. I could email it along. I could put it in the file sessions. So that way it's kind of a non-DAW specific, just a generic text file that, any computer could read easily. So just when you export the Notepad data, just print the text file and you should be in good shape. Okay, so we see question how to change the tempo of a specific event, only like audio file only. Okay, so, if we have, I'll just switch back to a different project. So if you want to, change the tempo, if you want it to be slower, in a project, so let's say I'm here and I want this file to, again, if I say, let's go to our sizing applies time stretch, and you could just hit the 1 key usually a couple of times to toggle back and forth between that. And I can say, I need that to fit into that amount of time. And now when I play it back, so that's, one method to do that. And just to, and if you needed to change the tempo as in metadata for the file, we could go directly to the pool window. So if you go to media to open pool window, look at your audio files and you could see the tempo information within that particular audio file there. And you could update if it's set to the wrong tempo. Okay, just reading through. All All right. So just see a great comment from Cap 10 Energy. It says, I've been at it for a really long time, like 1980 something. My first program was on a TRS-80 color computer. You actually had to write code to play music on it. I remember doing that on like an Atari 800 when I was 12 years old or something with my friend Pat in Sarsfield. So wasn't quite as enticing. Okay. Okay, so let's take so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Could you please tell me how to pitch bend automations? When I do it, it stays on the last note up or down. Then I have to correct it again with pencil, and even though the points are other value, thanks. Okay, so let's say if I have like a MIDI part here. Okay, so when we want to do pitch bend information here, and pitch bend is kind of interesting in that it could actually just be different for each for depending on each instrument could have an independent pitch bend range. So what some people do is just kind of come directly here and say, okay, I want to take this and I want to pitch bend, or let's just say I just want to quickly draw in like a pitch bend range, or I'll just do something a little more creative. So let's say I just want to record some pitch bend data here. So I'll just, as this is playing, do some awful pitch bend. And sometimes people get to the point where they leave it on a note that's not an actual where it's going to be out of tune, and then your MIDI, until it sees another pitch bend message, will slightly be out of tune. So what some people will do is just kind of come here and adjust the pitch bend data value back to like the no pitch bend data area. Now doing it sometimes, if you wanted to do it as automation data, you could come here and, a lot of people don't think it's possible, but I think if we're in this particular electric piano part, you could choose to go to more and be able to search, and it's buried. Someone convinced me it wasn't here, so I found it. But if you go to the particular channel and just type in pitch bend, that now you could draw pitch bend data in kind of using, the tools. So if I wanted to come here and just draw in pitch bend data, and if you wanted this to, as you do it as automation, you could have more, Bezier curves and stuff like that as well. So those are kind of two different approaches. But you may have to reset it if it's always going to be off, and, you could just kind of set it to, its particular value, and it's, could be not so intuitive originally, because pitch bend is represented in, like 4096. So you may have to figure out what kind of the default pitch bend data is here. So let's say if I put it at 0. So if I'm here, you could just choose the value. I think you put 0 in. At that point, it'll reset so that it's back in pitch. Okay, let's move on. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. If you haven't hit the like button and if you've learned something new, please feel free to do that and subscribe to the channel. Okay, so all right, so a question. When in Groove Agent SE, if you use two samples layered, can you change, edit individual samples in Groove Agent for pitch and volume? So let's go ahead and give it a shot. Okay, so let's say I'll do two different loops and samples. All right, so I'll just look for a kick. Okay, so let's say I'll just drag that over and I only want, let's say, the first sample of that. So now when I come here, okay, and let's say I'll put a snare on top. Okay, so I'll put that onto the same exact layer. All right, so it's on the same pad. So now, okay, I may have just layered it wrong. So let me just go back to kick. Okay, so I will. Sorry, it's annoying. All right. All right, sorry. You just. All right, just find some shorter samples here with some one shots. Sorry about that. Okay, so I think. That's a good sample. All right, so let's say if I have. just no faster way. Sorry for getting that the different icons for just sorry, it should be simpler. Okay. Okay, so now I have my two different samples that are split by velocity here. So higher velocities are my kick, lower velocities are snare. So I want to, let's see if we could tune these independently. So say I'll do coarse tuning. So it looks like the tuning is going to be not necessary for the sounds, but for the pad itself. So come here. Both of them will be adjusted independently. But let's say if I wanted to drag these to independent pads, and if we set these to the same pitch, so let's say so I'll click here and then I'll put this as D2. All right, so I'll just do a quick edit, learn trigger note. Okay, so now we have both of these kind of split, and let's see if I do. So if I have this, so we do tuning. And when I select this pad, so yeah, it looks like it's not going to allow you to do, so you could do it for each pad. And I'm going to just try to cut the samples here. I'll drag the snare onto this pad. So if you assign them to the same MIDI note, you could have independent pitch, but you know, it looks like it's kind of per pad. So sorry, it took a while to get there. But you could always change the samples themselves before dragging them in as well. Okay, so I see a question. Will you please explain Dissolve track in Cubase 10. I'm not sure what Dissolve track is. So I'm trying to see if it's maybe a misspelling. But maybe if it is for on the track Rec Studio AVK, if you could re-ask the question, maybe we could try to catch it. So I just see a question: is there any way to tighten up loop transient like in Ableton? So I'm not familiar with Ableton, but let's take a look. I mean, if you wanted to work with transients on loops. I'm not sure if this is the same thing that you're asking for, but we'll give it a shot. So if I have a loop here, so if you want to do like kind of more transient stuff, there is a built-in envelope shaper plugin. So I'm not sure if this is what you want, but under dynamics, and this is kind of an amazing plugin for drums. So if you want to come here, have kind of very tight, or if you want it, so you could definitely get some like huge or really tighter sounding drums using this, and it works amazingly on loops as well as just analog, like real live drums. So something you can kind of play around with. So I just see a comment, a young composer friend who interned for Giacchino recently said most Zimmer collaborations with Spitfire, Zimmer's old bespoke libraries that he's decommissioned from his own personal collection. So I don't think that's the case. I know Hans is, painstakingly did his own sample library a long time ago. And he's still using it. And I think what Hans does with his libraries is not only does it have kind of the typical sample layers for, for close miking and a little bit, but he has, I think, 32 channels up top that were recorded, kind of almost like height microphones, and so he could control how big or small. So if it's going to be intimate. So he's very, in my conversations with him, he's very, I don't think he's shared that library with many people outside of his, production team. So I don't think that the Spitfire stuff is any of Hans's old sample libraries, but I've had discussions with him on this, and what he's indicated to me is, it's like they're getting closer to what he's had, but it's still not there. So, and he spent a lot of money, and that's given him a huge advantage for his work. So, he hasn't really decommissioned his sample library that he did with Mark Wary. So. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. How can I apply the different meter color appearances like British Northern plus 12 dB in the preferences? So this was a new function was added in 10.5.2, I believe. So if we come over here to event display, there used to be kind of global meter settings. So let's jump to our preferences, and as we have this, and we'll say to let's just go to the meter displays in the preferences. Okay, so metering appearances. That now you could choose. So at this point, you could check and see, for each of these, different metering scales, you could have different metering options. And let's just, so how can I apply to different meter colors like British Northern, plus 12 dB in the preferences? Now, the meter preferences may also be tied to, so you could apply it there for your different, so each metering type could have different color schemes independently. So, and one thing, so you could have, plus 12 dB, and this could depend on the metering scale. Sometimes I get this question a lot where people may have older projects and they're like, oh, it only goes up to 6 dB. Why is that? And I think it's on your project setup, and this could be stored per project. So if you find that and this may not be so related, but just an aside, that if you want an additional 6 dB of gain, that you could set this from the volume max to plus 12 dB. So for some people that need, to go plus 12 dB above 0 on the master, you could just, or on the channel, you could just do it from the project setup as well. So in our comment, Zimmer should decommission his libraries directly to Cubase users, keep it in the family. I'm sure, I think Hans spent a lot of money doing that, and, he's still kind of using the same ones, but, it's a nice, altruistic wish, I guess. So, but I wouldn't anticipate it. Okay. All right. Okay, so just reading through some of the different comments. Okay, how can I take one MIDI performance and randomize the same performance to have it sound like it was two performances, like two drummers playing at the same time? So yeah, we could do that quite easily. So let's take a look. Let's say I'll just do a quick recording here. So let me just set this up. So I'll just go ahead and just transfer some MIDI parts in. Okay, so let's say I just have a couple of measures of MIDI here. Okay, so and if I wanted this to sound like, a couple to just have some random elements in it, I'll just duplicate this particular track. All right, and I'm just going to make sure that my Groove Agent isn't playing back at the same time. So let's just... So, and then really all you have to do is come to, under MIDI modifiers for one of the tracks, you can just come under MIDI modifiers, and here you could have random positions, random velocities, and you could set particular ranges. So let's say you want 80 and let's say 100, and we'll do the same for your velocity as well. So let's say 80 and 120. And then when you kind of play, you could have one that was the original, but you could, so say if I just wanted to, do length of notes. So at that point, check out the different randomizing functions under MIDI modifiers. And if you don't see MIDI modifiers, just right click and make sure that you have MIDI modifiers active. Okay, so just saying comment, there doesn't seem to be a program to allow automation of triggering a number of keys of a voice or synth to record into sampler and switching to next voice and then repeating. So once really you could just make a Cubase project to do that. And then once you have that one Cubase project, you could set up, the project, duplicate it, send a program change, duplicate the project, send a program change, etc. to automate it. So, once you kind of do it once, it's easy to create. So maybe for the next Hangout on Tuesday, if I have some free time, I'll see if I could create just a kind of an automated MIDI track for doing sampling. But it's pretty easy to do. So I see from John Costigan, or Costigan, sorry for mispronouncing your name. Hello, Greg and family. Can I merge my Pro 8.5 personal preferences with Pro 10.5 preferences? Or should I simply rewrite the keyboard shortcuts, macros Pro into 10.5? You could just copy them over. But in 8.5, I believe, was the first time that they introduced the profile manager. So most of the times it will carry over. If not, just go to your edit menu to profile manager. I believe 8.5 is when this feature was introduced. And at this point, you could export your profile. Go to 10.5 and import your 8.5 profile and all your key commands, your, presets you've made for quantization, presets you've made for, MIDI plugins, all those different functions, your preferences, key commands, your global workspaces, they'll all be carried over into your profile. So try just saving a profile. Yeah, and if you go into your preferences, you could just copy the preferences over from your Cubase 8.5 to your Cubase 10.5 preferences. Okay. Okay, so just seeing question, is it live now or are you watching replay? So it's currently going on, but if you're in the chat field, you may be well ahead of where I am. But we are currently live, so probably go for another 40 minutes or so. See how time goes. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, just reading through. Okay, so we had another question about the Desole track, Desole. So I'm not sure what that is. Sorry for not understanding. Okay, so I have a question about irregular tempo. Like, for example, 70 songs, I want to make a fixed tempo. Is there like a one-shot command that the song lock into the tempo? So yeah, we could do this quite easily. So if we go to our tempo detection functionality, and where there was varying tempos and we want those tempos to be steady, I'll show you how we could do that. Okay, so as we play this, it's not aligned to a grid. So I'm going to select a file, go to the project and go to tempo detect, tempo detection. All right, so now I'm going to close that. I'm just going to define the downbeat where it falls. We'll come here. So we see that every beat is a slightly different tempo. So if we look at our tempo changes, we can see, a vast number of tempo changes. So I'm going to select the file, go to audio to advanced. And what I'm going to do is basically embed the metadata of the time position of all the tempo changes into the file by choosing set definition from tempo. And I could write that into the project or into the audio file itself, hit OK. And now I go to my tempo map in Cubase and I say, let's just make it 120 beats a minute, perfectly steady. So it's now ignoring the original tempo here. Like say, make it 144. So now that's taking what was an irregular tempo, something that was very natural, and speeding up and slowing down, and we're able to regulate that. And if you wanted to just, you can make it perfect, and you can see it, doesn't, if I turn my tempo on, something that's really helpful, especially if you're doing like, live bands and it's like, oh, they're so close, but they just, is fluctuating a little too much. And then it's like, ends up being like 100 different takes of, just getting slightly worse and degrading every time. You could select the tempo changes here. And if you go to the right center area here, we could just kind of regulate and tame those or make them more spread more out, or kind of still have some natural tempo changes, but kind of minimize it and almost compress the variation in the tempos. So that's a really useful function as well. So hopefully that will work well for you. It's been a great feature for so many people. Okay, so just see a question, why time stretch change voice quality when I stretch? Anytime that you do time stretching, it's going to affect the quality of the audio. So, there are different algorithms that you could choose. So, there's a default algorithm that you could choose. So, but once you get into, and you could select them in the pool or in the project window. So some algorithms are more geared for particular types of material. Some will be for more like melodic content. Some will be for more rhythmic based. So for a vocal file, make sure that, you'll see like the algorithm listed here. And you may want to try experimenting with different algorithms, such as you may want to do pitch. And that would be better for vocals, whereas time may be better for drum and percussion elements. And tape mimics like an analog tape machine. So if you slow down the tempo, the pitch will change just like you're doing very speed recording. So those are a couple things to check out if you wanted to improve the quality of vocals when doing time stretching. Okay. Just reading through. So I see, don't suppose there's a way of making the tempo displayed large as time code or bar numbers can be. So let's see. I don't think so, but let's take a look. Is it time display? So I don't see a way, or I don't know of a way to have the tempo kind of large like that, but I can see where that could be useful. I mean, you could switch between different time formats, you can see the different beats, but not the tempo, but that would make sense. So, I'll pass that on. That could be interesting, but I'm not sure if that's as useful to see tempo as, if it's useful for you. But I could see where you'd want to see the time and measures large or SMPTE time code when scoring for film. So. Okay. Okay, so question, do you know a way to send motorized fader data to control CC message using a dummy track to send volume automation and convert it to CC data? So there are definitely motorized MIDI fader devices that are around that transmit MIDI CC messages. A lot of them kind of choose to ignore it, but let me just see if, so let's say if I have a MIDI track or just an instrument track, I'll just add here. And let's say if I want to draw in some automation, and let me just adjust this quickly. Okay, so say I have automation here. All right, so let's say if I select the automation and copy, and I go into a MIDI track, I'll just see if maybe it could be copied over. And so let's say volume, and then we want to paste. So let's say if I come here and paste, let me just select this, copy, and let's see if it carries over, and paste. So if we do that, we could do that as volume. Now, one thing that you may not, a lot of people don't know, is if you go to your CC automation setup, that you could have, your MIDI CC10 or CC7 rather for volume, and you could have that be an automation track. So now you could just have the same automation copied over just like that. So, but, it's not necessarily, a lot of the, like I know a lot of people have like, the smaller euphonics controllers. And I think the last, we had in the last hangout, like someone with an S1, which is also euphonics based. They don't just output MIDI data, but you should be able to just kind of copy the automation as MIDI data. But ideally, you'd want to have a controller that could output CC data. I see that you're using the Avid Artist, so that it's just that doesn't transmit MIDI CC data. But if you wanted to write it, you could cut, copy, and paste it like so. And it's off just a little bit timing, but I could paste it at origin as well. So I hit Option V, we'll see that those will line up to the same exact times. So, but it's a shame that a lot of controllers, motorized faders that are used for mixing just can't do a simple MIDI CC. So, okay. Okay, I think my timeline jumped, so let me just roll back. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. And while I'm here, we had a question on that was sent in with the settings. So there's a question about showing the track on tempo information, so like where you could see the volume, the waveform, and if there was a way to, see to change kind of the brightness of the waveform. So I haven't found a way to do that. But I will keep looking for one, but I'm inclined to say that there isn't a way to adjust the brightness of the waveform here in the automation lane. Okay. Okay, just reading through a couple of more questions. Okay, just reading through comments. Thanks for all the great discussion. So I just see, why is it making a sound when I use Shift Command click? Let me give it a shot here. So let's. So maybe I'm just kind of missing that out of context. Maybe it's for something else, not Cubase related. So question, can Cubase import sheet music? So it can, a lot of, it's not going to have any scanning capabilities. And I think we've seen a lot of people that have done the scanning capabilities kind of move away from that. So it doesn't do that, but a lot of sheet music's also passed over as music XML or standard MIDI files electronically. So if you wanted to do that, you could just simply, when you go to import, you could do, music music XML or standard MIDI files. That's a way that most people use to transfer between notation or sheet music. But when you kind of import the sheet music, why a lot of companies have shied away from it was by the time you look through every single note to see what it messed up, that it was much quicker just to actually input it from scratch. It wasn't a very reliable technology. So okay. Okay, so we had so nice comment from Keith Young. Greg, each session you never fail to impress me. I've learned so much over the sessions. Thank you. I'm glad it's helpful. So I'm happy that I could share knowledge and tips and tricks with people. So thank you for the nice comment. Okay, so I just see, hey Greg, I'm at a point where I want to route all of my tracks from the box to the board, then record that power and richness back into the box for my print. So you could definitely do that. All you have to do is, take your master output and, run it through the board and set up a stereo track return and, do a print back just like that. So, you could do that. A lot of times it may just sound different, and I kind of, over the years, I've transitioned a lot of really high profile mix engineers who swore they could never envision mixing in a computer totally, like multiple Grammy winning engineers. It's like, oh, you'll never do it in a computer. I need the console to get that sound. And, and over time, I've seen just about all of them. It's like, oh, mixing on a console sucks now. And it's just, it's horrible. And it's so great to have the recalls. And, no one has complained about sound quality. Everything is, I like it better. Clients like it better. So it's kind of interesting, but you could just simply take, your stereo out that's going into your monitors, and run it into the console and then take the output, whatever you're adding to it and record it directly back in. Okay. So I just see, I'm not sure if it's a comment or questions, but it's possible to change the measure from 2/4 to 4/4. So yeah, all you have to do for that is when you go to your signature track, you can right click, add track, and then you'll see a signature track. So as soon as we, and we see it kind of grayed out because we have one already in the project. But all you have to do here is, I'll just kind of zoom in a little bit. I'll turn on my snap and you can say, okay, this is going to be a 1/4 measure. And then this is going to be 2/4, by 7/8 to 4/4 to 5/4. And back to 4/4. So once you do that, then you could also just see your signature track here. And then if you want to import and export that independently, what's kind of cool about it is if you export your tempo track, that not only includes your tempo changes, but also all of your signature changes. And if you wanted to experiment with different meters and different time signature formats, you could also just come here and choose to have multiple track versions of signature tracks. Okay, so I see sub 403's got to run. Thank you, Greg, for always teaching me something new. Peace out, Baseheads. See you next time. Okay, so hopefully we'll see you on Tuesday's Hangout. Okay. Okay, just kind of reading through comments. Okay, so I see Pablo made it back. He's probably been back for 40 minutes. Okay. Okay, so good to see Ohas on the stream. Okay, hi Greg, Hallian SE, and Hallian Sonic. Can they import third-party MIDI loops or riffs other than audio? You can drag and. I'm just trying to think. So a lot of people can go through and create their own arpeggiators and stuff like that, but as MIDI loops or riffs are really kind of not so like a MIDI loop is kind of set to there's lots of MIDI loops for Hallian Sonic SE. So when you go to Audition, that those sounds can play back through Hallian Sonic SE, which is a subset of Hallian Sonic, which is a subset of Hallian. So, but there are third-party loops that are available for that. Most of them are sold kind of on the Steinberg online shop, so if you wanted to go through different MIDI loops, we'll go over here to media. We'll look at maybe some of the other ones. So let's say if I want to go to, let's see if there's MIDI loops on these. Let me just switch my media types to just MIDI loops, and we'll go through some other libraries. So like in production grooves, these are different MIDI loops, and these will be going. So if I drag that over, we'll see what instrument this might be. Yeah, Groove Agent. So there are, content that are MIDI loops from third-party companies. It may be sold on the Steinberg online shop, but there are. Okay. Okay, I know we had a question that was sent in about the lute, and it was about layering the loop previously. Let me just jump to it really quickly. Okay, so I'm just going to open up a copy just of the lute. So it's the first time I got a lute question, but it's actually kind of a cool little Hallian instrument. But I'll just kind of give you an idea. It's called Medieval Lute here. All right. So the question we had on this was, is it possible after layering in Lute to transfer the layers to Cubase Mix Console for mixing? And I think maybe the layers was for the two different strings, because when you work with the Lute, you could have kind of one voice, and it's kind of almost like, I think if you think of it maybe like a 12-string guitar, you could bring those in. So, and I think that as you outputted, if that's the layers that were kind of in question, that those will be kind of fixed with the instrument output, and the way to mix between the two is this blend knob. So, and I'll just put less reverb in it. So if that was kind of the layering question, we also had a question that someone had, I think it was Cubase AI or Elements, and they went to go load samples that they didn't see as many libraries available for them within their Halion Sonic SE3. So as you add more instruments, or if you have a bigger version of Cubase, you'll have more of these libraries. So if you don't see, if you see like a limited number of libraries compared to what I have, I kind of have all of the different I have most of the libraries. So if I wanted to go in Vibrant or Simple by Chris St. Aubin, or like, some of the Danny Luck stuff, at that point, you'll see more when you work with that. Last time we also had a discussion about soloing multiple tracks are selected. So let's say if I have a number of tracks here, like audio tracks, and I think someone was asking, so let's say we have 16 audio tracks on our session here, that if we had certain tracks selected, but not all the tracks, that, how we could choose to solo those tracks. So if you do it by clicking on solo, it's just going to kind of solo that individual track. But if they're all selected and you just hit S for solo, you could solo those particular tracks or mute the particular tracks that are only selected. Now, at this point, if you want to, just mute, one particular track. So if I'm here, I could just choose to say, if you hold down, I think it's Command S or Control S, that you could kind of overwrite the solo. So, there's kind of two different solo modes. So you could solo. So if you have multiple tracks and you're here and you solo, you could do that. Or if you have a track selected, that you could hit, I think it's, see if I get the right modifier key. But there's a modifier key for kind of a different level of solo. So, all right. So we have a couple more minutes left before we wrap up. If we go beyond 4 hours, I lose all of YouTube's very generous closed captioning, which is helpful for people whose primary language isn't English, because I'm the silly American that doesn't speak other languages. So try to have that as a benefit. But let's move on to a couple more questions and see. But I want to thank everyone for the great questions so far. Let's move on. Okay, so I saw Sir Robert just happy that you could change the meter colors. We'll give you that feature free, Robert, for going to the Hangout. All right. So just reading a comment, Greg. Hi, Greg. How to find the stock plugins, because sometimes I can't find them between my plugins. Thank you so much. So, you could search for, when you go to your plugin manager, really there's kind of different modes that you could work with. So you could show all plugins, or you could show, so there's a couple of different modes here where you can say, sort by vendor. So you could say, I want to look for my Steinberg plugins, or you could just say search by category. So again, if you go to Studio, to your VST plugin manager, you could, on the upper right-hand corner, just search by vendor. And that way you could easily kind of find all of your Steinberg plugins. Okay. All right, just catching up on my chat. So appreciate Jazz Dudes and other people that are helping, and Agent K for doing moderation. Hopefully it hasn't been too much of a hassle. I see Pablo went to dinner, just rubbing it in. All right, so okay. So it's just saying, Michael is saying hit the like button. And again, if you want to submit questions in advance for next Hangout, you could do it at Club Cubase at steinberg.de. Okay, John's thanking us for a well-spent afternoon. Hang up, my son is knocking. All right, let's go ahead and check the time. Okay, so we see if we have one more quick question. My son got some sparklers from his aunt. All right. All right. So let me see. Did I maybe catch up? Okay. So with that, so I think we've gone about 3 hours and 56 minutes. I want to thank everyone for the great questions. It's always a thrill being able to, share a little bit of knowledge from with different people. You can probably hear my son telling me it's time to go. But it's always great. I hope it's been helpful. If you liked it, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys on Tuesday. So Keith, let me know if that was, I hope that was the right answer for you for the lute. I'm sorry it took me a while to get the library, but let me know if I understood correctly. But again, thank you all for all the people who are helping other people while I'm catching up. And I hope that everyone has a great weekend and everyone stays safe and healthy. We'll probably have the Hangout index posted tomorrow morning, so look for that. And we'll see you guys on Tuesday at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Take care, and we'll see you then. Goodbye.